3 Alpha Kings watched their entire empire kneel, not for a rival, not for a weapon, but for a 2-year-old boy who ran straight to them crying, "Daddy!" The child had their eyes, their jaw, their blood in his veins. But the man who made him was the one person they had buried alive. The Grand Celestia Ballroom was the kind of place that reminded people of the distance between themselves and power. Chandeliers the size of small cars hung from a ceiling painted to look like a soul night sky. The floors were white marble, cold and perfect, and every person standing on them had been chosen, vetted, approved, permitted. 300 guests in formal wear, moving carefully through the room the way people move when they know they are being watched and want to be found worthy of watching. Park Jae-woo was not one of them. He was working. He stood at the far end of the east wing where the children's activity corner had been set up, low tables, soft mats, a portable music speaker, and 7 children between the ages of 2 and 5 who had been deposited by their parents and promptly forgotten. Jae-woo was fine with that. He understood children who were deposited and forgotten. He crouched down to adjust the music volume and counted heads the way he always did, quiet and automatic, because that was the job. That was the only reason he was here. Before we start, make sure to hit like and subscribe, and really I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. Riel was beside him. 2 years, 3 months, and 11 days old, dressed in a small white button-down that Jae-woo had ironed that morning, standing very still the way he sometimes did, the way that made strangers stop and stare because a child that young had no business looking that composed. Jae-woo had his hand loosely around his son's wrist, the casual anchor of a parent who had learned that Riel's stillness was not peace. It was attention. It was the moment before. The ballroom shifted. It was not a sound exactly. It was a pressure change, the way a room feels when something significant enters it. Conversation dropped by half a register. Shoulders straightened. The woman nearest to Jae-woo actually took one small step backward without appearing to know she had done it. The Kong triplets came through the main entrance at 8 p.m. exactly. Kong Sungjin, Kong Sungo, Kong Sunjil. 3 men who shared one face and divided a city between them. They moved through the parting crowd without acknowledging it, the way water doesn't acknowledge the things it flows around. Black suits, no ties, the kind of calm that is not relaxed but controlled, every muscle, every expression, every degree of eye contact precisely managed. They were the same height, the same build, the same sharp-angled jaw, and they walked with the kind of weight that made the marble floor feel like it was holding its breath. Jae-woo felt it the way everyone felt it. He looked up. Riel's wrist slipped free. Later, Jae-woo would not be able to explain the exact sequence. One moment his son was beside him. The next, small feet were hitting marble at a full run, arms thrown wide, white button-down catching the chandelier light, 2 years old and completely fearless, crossing the entire length of the ballroom like a child who had spotted something that belonged to him. The voice that came out of that small body cut through 300 people and a 12-piece orchestra and every careful, managed, politically calibrated conversation in the room. "Daddy! Daddy! Daddy!" Riel hit Kong Sungjin's legs at full speed and grabbed 2 fistfuls of suit trouser and looked straight up. The ballroom stopped. Not gradually. Not politely. It simply stopped, glasses frozen halfway to mouths, sentences abandoned mid-word, the orchestra losing its timing for the first time all evening. 300 people stared at the child gripping the most dangerous man in Seoul and calling him father with the absolute certainty of someone stating a fact. Sungjin looked down. The silence that followed was total. Because the child staring up at him had his jaw, his brow, the precise dark cut of his eyes. The seriousness in that small face that looked like it had been copied from all 3 of them and assembled into someone new and devastating. Phones rose without anyone deciding to raise them. Cameras clicked. The footage was already leaving the room. Jaiwa stood at the far end of the ballroom with his heart detonating in his chest, and no air in his lungs and nothing to say. Kang Sungjin slowly crouched down to the child's level. He did not push Riel away. He did not call security. He looked at the boy for a long, measured moment, at those eyes, that jaw, that face that should not exist, and then he raised his head and looked directly across the ballroom at Jaiwa. He said nothing. That silence was louder than any accusation ever could have been. Jaiwa did not sleep. He sat on the floor of his Siademan apartment with his back against the bed frame and Riel asleep across his legs, one small hand fisted in Jaiwa's shirt even in unconsciousness, and he watched the numbers on his phone climb. 47 missed calls by midnight. 93 by 2 in the morning. His lock screen had stopped being a lock screen and become something else entirely. A wall of names and headlines and photographs that someone with a fast phone had captured and uploaded before Jaiwa had even found the exit. The headline on the top entertainment news site read, "Omega produces secret heir for Kang Triplet Kings, child's resemblance undeniable." Below it, someone had posted a side-by-side. Riel's face from the video, blurry and taken from distance, beside a press photograph of Kang Sungjin. The jawline. The eyes. The specific gravity of expression that a 2-year-old had no right to carry. The comments had 40,000 replies. Jaiwa put the phone face down on the floor and stared at the ceiling. He knew the truth. He had always known the truth. Riel's father was a stranger, a man with a torn jacket and careful hands who had appeared in a theater on a rainy night and disappeared by dawn without leaving a name. That was the truth. That was the only truth Jaiwa had. But the photos did not care about his truth. The photos showed a child with a face that the public had already decided belonged to the Kang bloodline, and in a world that ran on image and bloodline and power, what the public decided had a way of becoming reality before anyone could correct it. His cousin Yongjae called at 3 a.m. Jaiwa let it ring. It rang 11 times. Then a text arrived, all capitals, the kind of message that comes from a person who has been humiliated in public and is looking for somewhere to put it. Jaiwa did not read past the first line. He was not afraid of Yongjae. He was afraid of something much larger. He was afraid of what happened when men who owned entire districts of Seoul decided that something small and bright and irreplaceable, something like Riel, belonged to them. Power did not ask. Power arrived. And Jaiwa had spent his whole life understanding, bone deep, what it felt like to be something that powerful people arranged without consulting. Riel shifted in his sleep and pressed his face harder into Jaiwa's leg and sighed the long, satisfied sigh of a child with no awareness of the storm he had started. Jaiwa pulled the blanket higher over his son's shoulders. His hands were steady. He had learned to keep his hands steady a long time ago. Then he looked at the window. The black SUV was parked directly across from his building. It had not moved in 2 hours. Its windows were tinted so dark they gave back nothing, no reflection, no shape, no information. Just presence. Just the message that someone already knew where he lived and had decided he should know they knew. Jaiwa did not close the curtain. He kept his eyes on the vehicle and his hand on his son's back and waited for morning with the specific stillness of someone who has learned that panic is a luxury he cannot afford. The knock came at 9 the next morning. 3 times. Measured. The kind of knock that is not asking permission so much as announcing a decision. Jaiwa opened the door. Kang Sungjin stood in the hallway of his building like an architectural error, too large, too composed, too precisely put together for the narrow corridor with its flickering overhead light and the neighbor's shoes left outside the wrong door. He had come alone. No security visible, though Jaiwa understood by now that invisible did not mean absent. He wore a dark coat, no tie, and he looked at Jaiwa the way he had looked at him across the ballroom, with that complete, unreadable attention that felt less like being seen and more like being studied. Jaiwa did not step back. "You shouldn't be here." "Probably not." Sungjin said. He did not move to enter. He waited. That surprised Jaiwoo enough that he stepped aside. Sungjin came in and looked at the apartment without comment. The single bedroom with the low bed where Riel's drawings were taped to the wall above the headboard. The kitchen table with the music stand and the stack of practice schedules for the children's classes. The small and careful and very deliberate life Jaiwoo had built from nothing, piece by piece, for 2 years. Sungjin looked at all of it with the expression of a man cataloging information he intends to keep, and said nothing about any of it. Then Riel came out of the bedroom in his sleep shirt with his hair destroyed, looked at Sungjin, and without any hesitation walked directly to him and raised both arms. Sungjin crouched. He picked the child up. And he went completely still, the specific stillness of a man who has just been handed something he does not have a category for and is very carefully not showing it. Riel patted his cheek. Sungjin's jaw tightened. He set the boy down gently, straightened, and looked at Jaiwoo. The media situation will get worse before it resolves. Your address is already in circulation. By tomorrow there will be cameras outside this building. He paused. I'm offering you space at the estate while this is managed. Riel would have security. You would have privacy. This is not a demand. No, Jaiwoo said. Sungjin nodded once, as if he had expected that. The silence ran for about 30 seconds. Then Riel tugged twice on Sungjin's sleeve, looked up with those devastating eyes, and said in his small, certain voice, "Stay, Daddy." Sungjin looked at the child. Then back at Jaiwoo. Jaiwoo looked at his son, at the complete trust in that face, at the way Riel leaned into this stranger like he was something familiar and safe, and he felt something in his chest break open and rearrange itself into a shape he didn't have a name for yet. He turned to the bedroom. He pulled Riel's overnight bag from the bottom of the wardrobe. He began to pack it. His hands were shaking, just slightly, just enough that he noticed. He did not look up. He did not explain. He packed. If this story is already pulling you in, hold on tight. Because what happens inside that estate will change everything. Make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss a single chapter. And drop a comment right now. The Kong estate sat behind walls that did not look like walls. They looked like landscaping, tall, sculpted hedgerows and black stone columns that suggested rather than announced their purpose. The driveway alone was longer than Jaiwoo's entire street in Siademan. The main house was glass and dark steel and natural wood, clean-lined and enormous, the kind of architecture that communicated wealth without trying to, which was the most expensive kind. Jaiwoo stepped out of the car holding Riel on his hip and looked at it, and felt, for one very honest moment, absolutely nothing. He had grown up in a wealthy home. He knew what money looked like when it was used as a wall. He adjusted Riel's weight on his hip, picked up the overnight bag, and walked forward. A staff member showed them to a room on the second floor, large, warm-lit, with a connecting smaller room that had already been prepared for Riel. Jaiwoo stood in the doorway of the child's room and looked at the low bed with the guardrail and the soft rug and the small shelf of books, and understood that someone had thought about this before the offer was even made. He filed that information away and did not let it show on his face. By the third hour, the house had a rhythm, and Jaiwoo was learning its shape. He took Riel to the long east corridor for warm-up, open floor, good light, and far enough from the main rooms that the music wouldn't carry. He sat cross-legged on the floor and counted beats while Riel practiced the turn sequence they had been working on for 2 weeks. Riel was not particularly graceful yet, but he was committed, and commitment at 2 years old was something Jaiwoo took seriously. He did not hear Kang Sungo approach. He simply became aware, after some time, that there was someone standing at the far end of the corridor. Still. Watching. Not announced, not retreating. Just present. Jaiwoo kept counting. He did not look up immediately, because Riel would lose the beat if he did. He finished the sequence, caught Riel mid-spin, set him back on his feet, and then looked up. Sungo's expression gave away almost nothing. But he had not left. He stayed there for the remainder of the warm-up, arms folded, back against the wall, watching with that flat, careful attention. When Jaiwa finally called the end of practice and scooped Riel up, Sungo turned and walked away without a word. Jaiwa looked at the empty corridor for a moment. Then he looked at his son. Riel pointed after Sungo and said, with great satisfaction, "Daddy." 20 minutes later, in the west courtyard, a security dog, large, startled by Riel's sudden movement, pulling against its handler's grip, lunged. It did not get far. Jaiwa was already in front of his son. No dramatic motion. No sound. He simply placed his body between the animal and Riel and held still, and the dog's handler got control, and Jaiwa reached back and kept Riel pressed against his legs until it was over. From the second-floor landing, Kang Sunjio watched. He said nothing when Jaiwa looked up and found him there. He turned and walked away. But his expression, in the half-second before he turned, that small controlled fracture in a face built to give nothing away, told Jaiwa something he hadn't expected. That evening, all three triplets came to dinner. Riel climbed into the chair between Sungjin and Sungo, declared this arrangement correct, and began demolishing a bowl of rice with a focus that the adults at the table matched in silence. Jaiwa sat across from all of them, and watched his son belong to a table he was still figuring out how to sit at. He picked up his chopsticks. He ate. He said nothing. But beneath the table, his foot found the floor and pressed against it, and he held that small pressure like an anchor. By the third day the walls were cracking, quietly, the way good walls do, at the joints rather than the surface. Sungjin read to Riel every evening. It had started without announcement. Riel had simply appeared in the main sitting room with a book and deposited it in Sungjin's lap with the confidence of a child who has decided how things will go. Sungjin had looked at the book, then at the child, then opened to the first page. He read with the careful, even tone of a man who did not have practice at this and was refusing to be careless with it. Jaiwa watched from the doorway with his shoulder against the frame and his arms folded and something tightening incrementally in his chest, because he recognized that quality, the quality of someone discovering tenderness for the first time at an age when they had expected to be past it. He did not go in. He watched from the door and felt it, and then he walked away. Sungo appeared at the private studio on the second morning. Jaiwa had converted the estate's practice room for Riel's daily session, pushed the furniture back, set up the speaker, laid the soft mat in the center. He was 3 songs in when he noticed Sungo in the doorway. Same position as the corridor. Same stillness. Jaiwa kept going. He ran the full 40-minute session while Sungo stood there, and neither of them said a word about it. On the 4th day, between songs, Jaiwa heard it. Sungo, half a hallway away, humming. The warm-up melody. Exactly on pitch. Doing it without appearing to know he was doing it. Jaiwa turned back to the mirror and absolutely refused to find that endearing. Sunjio's approach was different. Less observation, more precision. He appeared one afternoon with a box that he set on the floor in front of Riel without explanation. Inside was a custom wooden construction set, 43 individual pieces, interlocking, no instructions. He sat down on the floor. Riel sat beside him. And Sunjio began building with the focused silence of a man who treats every problem the same way, whether it is a hostile corporate acquisition or a wooden puzzle for a 2-year-old. It took 40 minutes. When the final piece clicked into place, a small tower with a movable gate, Riel made a sound of pure delight and threw his arms around Sunjio's neck. Sunjio's hands came up. Careful. Hesitant. And then they closed around the child, and he held on. Jaiwa looked away. His throat felt strange. That evening, after Riel had been settled, Sungjin sat across from Jaiwa at the long dining table, no staff, no brothers, and asked him, directly and without warning, "What was your life like before?" Jaiwa looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked up. "I existed," he said. "I didn't live." Sungjin did not look away. He held Jaiwa's eyes with that full, undeflected attention that Jaiwa still had not learned how to receive without his pulse going uneven. "That changes now," Sungjin said. He said it the way he appeared to say most things, quietly, finally, like something being signed. Jaiwa looked at him. He thought about asking what that meant exactly, what it was being offered, what the terms were. He was good at terms. He had learned early to look for them. He didn't ask. He went to his room and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and pressed his hands flat against his knees and held very still. Because something had shifted in the last 3 days, and he could feel it with the precision of someone who had spent their entire life cataloging what safety was not, and had just, for the first time, run out of reasons to argue against what it might be. He sat in the dark for a long time. He was terrified. Not of them. Of how much he wanted to stay. If you are feeling every single second of this slow burn, you are exactly where this story needs you. Make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so the next chapter lands directly on you. And I need to know right now, which brother has your heart so far? Drop their name in the comments. Let the debate begin. Riel's fever hit 103 degrees at 2 in the morning, and Jaiwa was already moving before the thermometer finished reading. He had the cool compress ready in under a minute, Riel propped against his chest, small body radiating heat like something burning from the inside. Jaiwa kept his voice even. He counted Riel's breaths. He pressed the compress to the back of his son's neck and spoke in the low, steady rhythm he had used since Riel was newborn. Not words exactly, just sound, just the frequency of calm, because children feel what their parents carry even when they cannot name it. He did not expect the door. All 3 of them appeared in the hallway within 4 minutes. That was the part that undid him. Not one, not the one whose room was nearest, but all 3, still in their night clothes, hair undone, the controlled precision they wore like armor completely absent. Sungjin's shirt was half-buttoned. Sungo had come without shoes. Sunjil stood in the doorway with an expression that had no management in it at all, just open, raw, human alarm. They did not crowd in. They held the doorframe and watched Jaiwa work and did not get in his way, and that restraint, the effort it clearly cost them to stand still when every instinct was pushing them forward, pressed against something inside Jaiwa's chest like a hand against a bruise. The fever broke at 3:15. Riel went soft and heavy in Jaiwa's arms, the terrible heat fading, his breathing smoothing out into sleep. His fingers, even unconscious, found Sungo's hand where it rested on the edge of the mattress. They curled around 2 of his fingers and held on. Sungo did not move for a long time. In the corridor afterward, the 4 of them stood in the particular silence of people who have just come through something together, and have not yet decided what to do with that. The overhead light was low. The house was completely quiet. Jaiwa looked at the floor and tried to remember what his face was supposed to do. Sungjin said it quietly, like something he had been holding for a while and was finally setting down. "You make us want to be different." Jaiwa looked at him. 3 powerful men in a hallway at 3 in the morning, brought here by a toddler's grip on a finger, standing without any of the architecture of power they usually occupied. He looked at all 3 of them and felt the truth of what Sungjin had said like a key finding the right lock. "You already are," he said. "You just don't see it yet." The distance between him and Sungjin was very small. Either of them moved. But neither of them looked away either, and in that held stillness something crossed between them that did not need words and would not have survived them. Jaiwa went back to Riel's room. He sat in the chair beside the bed and listened to his son breathe and did not sleep. The sealed envelope arrived at the estate gate at 7 the next morning. No return address. No postmark. Inside, a single photograph, printed on plain paper, edges clean. Jaiwa and Riel, outside his old Siademan building. Jaiwa was carrying groceries. Riel was on his hip, pointing at something off-frame. The timestamp in the corner read 3 months ago. Someone had been watching them long before the ballroom. Sungjin closed the door behind them, and did not sit down. He stood at the window with his back to the room for a moment, and Jaiwo understood from that single gesture that what came next had weight, that Sungjin was arranging something before he turned around, the way a person does when they are about to say something true and want to say it correctly. When he turned, his face was open in a way Jaiwo had not seen before. Not soft. Not uncertain. Just honest, the way a blade is honest, direct, without pretense. The empire you've read about in the press, he said, is the version we allow people to see. I want you to know the real one. Jaiwo sat with his hands in his lap and listened. Sungjin did not flinch from any of it. Rivals removed from the board permanently. Money that moved through channels no legitimate institution would touch. Violence used the way a surgeon uses a scalpel, targeted, deliberate, without excess but without apology. He explained it the way a man explains weather, as a condition of the world he inhabits, not a confession seeking forgiveness. I'm not a good person, he said. But I am honest. Jaiwo was quiet for a moment. Then he asked the only thing that mattered to him. Has a child ever been harmed because of you? Sungjin met his eyes without hesitation. No. Never. Jaiwo looked at him for a long time, at that face he had memorized without deciding to, at those careful, honest eyes, and made his decision the way he made all his decisions, from somewhere below language. Then we stay, he said. The door opened. Sungjil came in without preamble and set a tablet on the table between them. The photograph had been traced. The technology used to take it was specialized, the kind used by people who are professionals at not being found. The man behind it had a name. Seo Haewon. Underground network leader. Believed dead for 3 years. The single name in the Kong Empire's operational history that appeared in every serious threat assessment, and never once came with a confirmed outcome. The name meant nothing to Jaiwo. He looked at it and felt nothing move. Then Sungjil set the secondary file beside it. A grainy security image, pulled from a camera outside a building 2 kilometers from the estate. Long lens capture. The subject was walking away from the frame, face turned at a 3/4 angle, the image low resolution and dark. Jaiwo looked at it. His blood stopped moving. The jaw. The line of the shoulder. The particular way the hands hung at the sides, loose but ready, like a man who had learned to look relaxed and never fully managed it. The angle of the head in the dark. He knew that face. Not from a file. Not from a news report. From a rainy night in a theater 4 years ago, when he had been 23 years old and crying in the wings, and a man with a torn jacket and bleeding side had looked at him like he was the first real thing he had encountered in years. He knew those hands. He knew the shape of that silence. Across the table, his cup tilted. Tea ran across the surface and off the edge, and he did not move to catch it. His hands were flat on the table and completely still, and his face gave nothing away, and the only evidence of what was happening inside him was the cup, tipping, spilling, emptying. Nobody in the room said anything. The estate locked down by nightfall. Security that had already been significant became absolute. The inner gate codes changed. 2 additional vehicles were added to the overnight rotation. The east wing, where Jaiwo and Riel had been staying, was deemed too exposed, and by 8 in the evening a staff member was at the door with the quiet efficiency of people who execute decisions rather than explain them. They were moved to the inner wing, closer to the center of the house, closer to the triplets' rooms than Jaiwo had been since arriving. Riel thought it was an adventure. He carried his own small bag down the corridor with great seriousness, stopping once to check on his wooden tower toy, which he had insisted on bringing. Jaiwo carried everything else, and said nothing and kept his breathing even. The new room was warmer. The walls held the heat of a house that had been lived in rather than displayed. Through the wall to his left, Jaiwo could hear the low movement of Sungjin working late, the occasional sound of a chair, papers. Through the wall to his right, nothing. Sungjil moved through space without announcing himself, even in private. Jaiwa lay in the dark after Riel fell asleep and looked at the ceiling and thought about the photograph on the table. The cup he had not caught. The face and the security image that he had recognized the way you recognize a song you heard once, years ago, at a moment that changed you, not because you have thought about it every day, but because it lived somewhere below thought, below memory, in the part of you that keeps records without asking permission. He could not tell the triplets. He understood this with the cold clarity of someone doing math in an emergency. If he told them, if he said the words out loud, if he confirmed that the man they feared was Riel's biological father, then everything they believed about this situation collapsed. The child they had already begun to love with a fierceness that surprised even them. The reason they had offered protection. The story the entire city was telling about what Riel was and who he belonged to. All of it would need to be rebuilt from nothing, and Jaiwa did not know if what was being built between them was strong enough yet to survive that kind of reconstruction. So he held it. He held it the way he had learned to hold things, carefully, without letting it show, the way you carry something fragile in a crowd. Down every corridor the next day, Riel held Sungo's hand with the confidence of a child who has made a permanent decision. He called for Sunjil at 2 in the morning when a dream woke him, and Sunjil was there in under 90 seconds, sitting on the edge of the small bed in the dark, one hand resting on the child's back until Riel's breathing slowed. He fell asleep across Sungjin's chest after dinner with his wooden tower clutched to his side, and Sungjin sat completely still for 40 minutes rather than move him. Jaiwa watched all of this, and felt the weight of what he was carrying double. That evening he stood on the inner wing terrace alone, looking out at the estate gardens, the clean geometric lines, the stone lanterns at the path's edge throwing low warm light, the city a distant glow beyond the walls. The night air was cold enough to sting. He had been standing there long enough to lose feeling in his fingers when he became aware that he was no longer alone. Sungo did not announce himself. He simply appeared at the railing beside Jaiwa and stood there, both hands resting on the stone, looking out at the same darkness. He did not ask what was wrong. He did not offer reassurance. He was simply there, in the uncomplicated way of someone who has decided that presence is enough and does not need to be anything else. The shaking started somewhere in Jaiwa's shoulders and moved down. He had been holding too much for too many hours and his body finally decided to put some of it down without consulting him first. Sungo did not move away. He did not say anything performative or reaching. He just stayed. Eventually, Jaiwa said it into the dark. "I don't deserve this." Sungo's answer came without pause, without softness, without cruelty, just flat simple truth. "You keep saying that. We keep disagreeing." The terrace was quiet after that. The stone lanterns held their light. The city glowed in the distance like something waiting. Then, from somewhere below them inside the house, the gate intercom activated. The sound carried up through the still night air, a single channel of static, and then a voice. Low. Controlled. The specific register of a man who does not need to raise his voice to be understood. The voice said only, "Tell him I'm here." Jaiwa's hands closed around the terrace railing. His knuckles went white. He did not breathe. He knew that voice the way he knew the security photograph. Not from memory. From somewhere deeper than memory. From the place where things that happen to you at 23 in a theater in the rain get filed and kept forever. If this story has been living in your chest since the beginning, you are exactly the audience this was made for. Subscribe right now and turn on your notifications so you do not miss a single chapter when it drops. And tell me in the comments, did you see Haywin coming, or did this chapter just completely destroy you? Drop your reaction below. I read every single one. Seo Haywin did not come in like danger. He came in like weather, inevitable, already arrived, the kind of thing you brace for because there is no other option. He stood in the formal hall of the Kang estate, and the three brothers arranged themselves without a word, Sungjin forward, Sungo and Sunjio flanking, the instinctive geometry of men who have spent their lives presenting unified force. The room had the specific charged stillness of a space that has been prepared for confrontation. Haywin looked at none of them. His eyes found Jaiwa from across the room and stayed there. Not threat. Not possession. Recognition, the raw, unguarded kind that a person cannot fake and cannot hide, the kind that only comes from having looked for something for a long time and finally finding it standing right in front of you. He said, "I searched for you. For 2 years. Every trace of you was gone." Jaiwa's throat closed. Because he understood in that moment, not gradually, not as a theory, but as a complete and sudden knowing, that the man had not left by choice. The Kong Empire's corporate war had swept through the underground networks 3 years ago, dismantling rivals, severing connections, erasing entire operational histories. They had not known Haywin's connection to Jaiwa. They had not known Jaiwa existed. They had simply burned the field, the way powerful things do, without knowing what small things were growing in it. Two people separated by a machine that didn't know they were there. The understanding arrived in Jaiwa like a wound opening. Then Riel walked in. He had come from the connecting corridor, still in his day clothes, wooden tower tucked under one arm, looking for Jaiwa with the purposeful urgency of a child who has decided it is time for something. He stopped in the doorway and looked at the room full of adults and did the small assessment that children do, reading the energy, deciding where it was safe to land. He looked at Haywin. Haywin went completely, absolutely still. The child's face, his jaw, the specific architecture of those eyes, the seriousness that lived in the expression like something inherited, was looking back at him. Haywin looked at his son for the first time. He stood there and took it in with the expression of a man who has imagined a moment for 2 years and discovered that the reality of it is larger than any imagination could have built. Riel looked back for a long moment. Then he stepped backward. His hand reached up and found Sungjin's hand beside him, fingers wrapping around 2 of his, and he pressed himself against Sungjin's leg and looked at Haywin from that position of claimed safety with cautious, careful eyes. The silence that followed was the cruelest thing in the room. Worse than any confrontation. Worse than the 3 brothers' presence, the locked estate, the weight of everything that had led to this moment. The cruelest thing was a child reaching for someone else in front of the man who made him. Haywin's jaw tightened. He looked at Jaiwu, and his expression was grief wearing the only face it had available, composure, thin and barely holding. "If I had found you first," he said, "would you have stayed with me?" Jaiwa's eyes filled. The answer came from that place below language, below thought, from the part of him that had kept records without asking permission since a rainy night in a theater when he was 23 years old and a stranger had looked at him like he was real. "Yes," he whispered. And he meant it. He meant it completely, and Haywin heard it completely, and neither of them pretended otherwise. Then Riel, overwhelmed by the room's weight in the way that small children are overwhelmed, not by understanding it but by feeling it pressing on them from all sides, began to cry. Not dramatically. Just the quiet, desperate crying of a child who needs to be somewhere safe. He reached for all 3 triplets at once, face buried in Sunggo's neck, fingers gripping Sunjil's sleeve, one hand still locked in Sungjin's grip. Haywin watched. He watched his son choose, watched comfort be taken from other hands, watched the family that had been built in the space his absence had left, and he understood. Not with acceptance yet, but with the beginning of understanding. The kind that hurts because it is true. He reached into his coat and set something on the table. A photograph, folded, the creases deep and soft from years of handling. Jaiwa and Riel outside the old theater in Mapo district. Riel was days old in the image, wrapped in the carrier, Jaiwa looking down at him on the steps. The night was dark in the photograph. The theater's old sign was lit behind them. Haywin had found it years ago. He had carried it for 2 years of searching. He had never stopped looking. He set it down and stepped back. Haywin left before dawn. He did not leave in anger. He left the way a man leaves when he has understood something he cannot change and has decided to carry it with dignity rather than resistance. He asked only one thing before he walked out, just one, quietly, standing in the doorway with the cold morning air coming in behind him. He asked for the child's name. Jaiwa told him. Haywin said it once. Riel. He said it the way you say the name of something you are memorizing to keep, not to hold, but to carry. Then he walked out into the grey soul morning and was gone, and the estate door closed behind him, and the house took a breath. The triplets did not celebrate. They did not discuss strategy or manage the narrative or reach for the mechanisms of control that were, in most situations, their first instinct. They simply came, one by one, to the sitting room where Jaiwa had settled with Riel asleep across his lap, and they stayed. Sungjin sat across from him. Sungo took the chair by the window. Sunjil stood, then eventually sat on the floor with his back against the wall, which was somehow the most human thing Jaiwa had ever seen him do. The room was warm. The morning was quiet outside the glass. Sungjin spoke first, and he spoke without preamble, without the armor of the boardroom or the weight of the empire behind it. He spoke like a man. We're not asking you to stay because of him. We're asking because of you. Jaiwa looked at his son. Riel's face was slack and sleep, one hand curled against his own cheek, his small chest rising and falling with the absolute peace of a child who has never once doubted that someone is watching over him. He looked at the three men in this room who had, over the span of days, rearranged themselves around this child, around Riel's grip on a finger, Riel's fever, Riel's wooden tower, Riel's certainty that he had found his people and they were these people, and Jaiwa understood that the question being asked was not really about staying. It was about choosing. And choosing was different from staying. Staying was what you did when you had nowhere to go. Choosing was what you did when you looked at two paths clearly, and reached for the one that led towards something real. He looked at Sungjin. Then at Sungo, who met his eyes with that steady, uncomplicated warmth that had stood beside him on a terrace in the dark and asked nothing. Then at Sunjil, sitting on the floor against the wall, watching him with the expression of a man who has stopped pretending he does not care. He thought about Haywin. He let himself think about it without flinching, the theater, the rain, the one night that had changed the entire trajectory of his life. He held that grief cleanly, because it was real and it deserved to be real, and then he set it down. Not discarded. Set down. The difference mattered. He did not say anything. He simply stayed. 8 months later, Park Jaiwa stood at the entrance of a building on the corner of the street where the old municipal theater used to hold him together on his worst days. The building was glass-fronted and warm-lit, 2 stories, new construction on a lot that had been cleared and rebuilt in under 4 months by a development company whose records, if you trace them far enough through the right corporate channels, connected back to a name Jaiwa now recognized. The plaque beside the door read, Riel Dance Academy. For Omega children without families. He had mentioned it once. One time, at 2 in the morning, lying in the dark with Riel asleep between him and Sungjin, speaking the way people speak at that hour, not asking, not planning, just thinking out loud about what the world was missing. He had said it once and then let it go. He had not known that Sungjin had not let it go. Inside, children filled the studio. Small bodies in soft practice clothes, counting beats, spinning with the committed chaos of children who are just learning that movement can be a language. An instructor at the front clapped the rhythm. Someone fell and got back up immediately, the way children do when they are too focused to be discouraged. Jaiwa stood at the entrance and felt something settle in his chest, not the relief of something ending, but the arrival of something that had been on its way for a long time. Riel appeared at his side. Taller now, the baby roundness of his face sharpening into the angles he would carry as he grew, those eyes, that jaw, that expression of ancient seriousness that Jaiwa had called his soul long before he understood what bloodline it came from. He stood beside Jaiwa and looked at the studio with the focused attention he brought to everything. Then his head turned. 3 figures were walking across the lot toward them, tall, unhurried, moving through the afternoon light with the kind of presence that made people look up without knowing why. Kong Sungjun, Kong Sungo, Kong Sunjio, arriving together the way they always arrived, as a single thing, a shared gravity. Riel looked at them for exactly 1 second. Then he ran. Arms wide, full speed across the lot, no hesitation. The same run that had crossed the ballroom 8 months ago and detonated everything. He hit them at the same time, somehow, all three at once, small arms reaching for whatever they could reach, and the three of them crouched down around him with the ease of people who have done this enough times that it lives in the body now. Riel looked up at all three of them with the satisfied expression of someone whose understanding of the world is complete. "My daddies," he announced. To no one. To everyone. To the street, to the children inside the studio, to the afternoon, to whatever part of the universe was listening. Jaiwo watched from the door with his hand on the plaque and something warm moving through his chest like the first morning of a season that has finally arrived. Some loves are interrupted by fate. Others buried by power. But a child's voice has a way of pulling every buried thing back to the surface, and reminding the world that family was never about blood. It was always about who stayed. If this story reached you, if you felt any part of it in your chest, then this channel was made for you. Subscribe right now and turn on your notifications, because new stories are coming and you do not want to arrive late to the next one. Take a moment and leave a comment below. Tell me what this story meant to you. Tell me which moment broke you open. Tell me which chapter you are still thinking about. Your words are what make this community real, and I read every single one. And if someone in your life needs a story that reminds them that chosen family is the truest kind, share this with them today. You never know who needed to hear exactly this. Thank you for staying until the end. That is the best thing a viewer can do. And this story, all of it, was for you.